Hi there, welcome to Floating in Books. This is going to be my spring book recommendations. Welcome to everybody watching today. Thank you so very much for joining me. This video is going to be a quick one where I share 10 books with you that I think are going to be perfect for spring. Now granted, I haven't read all of these yet, but they could be my spring picks. I'm definitely a bit of a mood reader. I tend to go back and forth between things just to keep things interesting. And I've got quite a few things here that I'm very excited for. They are some books that are newer into me that maybe have I shown you all of these in a haul? I think I have. I don't think I necessarily bought these and haven't shown you them. But I think all of these are pretty good picks for the spring season, and let me tell you why. First up is a book that I have actually read, and I saw this sitting on my shelf and I was like, I haven't talked about this book in ages, and I did really enjoy it back when I did. I believe it is part one of a sci-fi sort of weird fantasy kind of esque book series where we follow a character in a world where colors rule everything. So it's called Shades of Grey, and it's by Jasper Fforde. And I read this years ago, so I do need a bit of a reminder here, so maybe I get some of the details wrong. But if I remember correctly, the entire world has lost its color and everyone can only see one type of color. So people are blue or red or green, and this book talks about this world that these people live in, and there needs to be like a balance between that, and it's a very sort of totalitarian regime that they live in. And then the main character and his dad, something happens to them, they do something wrong, and they are put on essentially on this journey where they're not supposed to return and they're not supposed to know what's going on. But as this book progresses, they actually figure out what this world is doing to them and how the regime actually works. So they sort of go from being brainwashed to finding out what's wrong with the world, which I thought was an interesting journey. And this was a very interesting read. It was a bit slow paced, I do remember that. I mean, my edition is over 400 pages, and the typeset on this is very tiny. So I would not recommend necessarily getting this edition. Mine is very discolored and loved because look at those edges. I remember putting this in my bag on the train a lot. It took me a while to actually read this, but I felt that it was very rewarding in the end. And I think that because of the colors and everything, the entire idea behind it makes it perfect for spring. A book I haven't read, but that because of the cover, it's very sort of spring-esque with these pinks and blues, and it's Cleopatra and Frankenstein by Coco Mellors. This was recommended to me by one of my neighbors who read this and said, well, if you like my year of rest and relaxation, you might like something like this as well. I think it's about a woman called Cleo who meets a guy who's much older than her, and he's your Wall Street bro who has all the money, and she's very enamored with his presence. And she sort of falls into that. They get married and things go horribly wrong. That's what I know about this, but the main reason I think this is a spring pick is because of the color scheme here. It's one of those books that I've seen floating around book tables for the longest time, and I finally decided to pick it up earlier this year. So I'm not sure if I've shown you this one in a haul. If not, by the time I do a haul, you will see this again. But I hope to actually read this soon. I'm currently in the midst of the final book in the Atlas trilogy by Olivia Blake, which it's a little difficult for me to get into this one. I'm not loving it as much as the second book, which is because the second book was better of the first one. I was like, oh, I might as well. And this is one of the contenders to be my next read, actually, because I have been reading sort of magical realism, fantasy-esque stories back to back for most of March. And I'm like, I need something a little bit more realistic again in my life. And this is because this is probably going to be a spring read for myself. I wanted to make sure to put it on this list. Another thing I have actually read Daisy Jones and the Six. And the reason why this goes on to the spring book recommendations might just be because I remember reading this in the springtime. And I'm not sure anymore whether it was the year we got the pandemic or right before it or a year before that. I don't remember. But I do remember vlogging on this channel. So I had probably just started this channel, which I think was 2020. When I actually read this. But yeah, Daisy Jones and the Six is one that I think is perfect for spring. In case you don't know what this is about, it's about the members of a very popular group that are being interviewed about how their experience was being in this group. And the name of the band is Daisy Jones and the Six. It's very sort of Fleetwood Mac inspired. It very much has that throwback to the 70s kind of vibe, where it starts as just a couple of guys jamming in a shed, and then this lady enters the scene, and it sort of upends, like, it makes them super popular, and it also means that there's a lot of crashing, you could say, a lot of conflict. There's a nice twist to this at the end if you're unfamiliar with Taylor Jenkins Reid's book. I feel she does a similar thing in the other book I've read by her, The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, which may not be your cup of tea, but I like this throwback to the 70s rock and roll era, and this is a TV series on Prime, which I tried watching and I didn't think it was that engaging. I felt they completely miscast pretty much the entire series, because the people in the series who play the characters are far too old for how old the actual people in the book are. So for me, it just didn't feel very realistic. So that's why I think it's good that they got some like actual people with musical talent in the TV series, but I felt there was just something off in the acting, and it didn't feel very genuine. So to me, that wasn't a very successful thing. But if you don't want to read the book, you could watch the TV series instead if you'd like to. And it has that 70s sort of rocker vibe in LA, and it's perfect for springtime. Something I haven't read, and again, this is more of like because the cover is yellow, I think I might like it for the springtime kind of thing. But I finally managed to pick up a book by Gavriel K. And this is A Brightness Long Ago. And this is a book that was recommended to me way back when I first started this channel. One of you actually told me that I should check out this author, or maybe it was even back when I was only blogging about books, but it was a while ago that someone recommended this author to me. And I didn't know where to start. And so when I did a bit of research into everything he had written, this was the title that stood out to me. And his books haven't been available at my bookstore for a while. So I was trying to track it down. I could find it online, but it was pretty expensive. And because it was an author I didn't know, I was like, do I like it? And then all of a sudden, now they suddenly have a bunch of his books at my local bookstore. So I picked it up. And if I'm not mistaken, what this author does is to like make fantasy stories, but they all have a realistic horror, like historical setting. So I believe this is set in Renaissance Italy, but it does have like, fantasy elements to it as well. So it's sort of like 1 foot in history, 1 foot in fantasy, and that is what really appealed to me about this story. I prefer fantasy stories that feel more realistic. I'm not a huge fan of like the medieval different worlds with the dragons and like the very stereotypical fantasy that a lot of people consider to be high fantasy. That's not my cup of tea. I love a good urban fantasy story, and this sounds like something that I might like because it does have that realistic setting. So I think this is going to be perfect for spring. Not sure when I will pick it up, but yeah, it is set in Italy, so I'm thinking of like sunshine and nice weather and like all of the Italian vibes. And since spring is it doesn't look it today because we're having so much rain still like it's the never-ending rain is definitely the theme here. But yeah, it's gray and windy, and it feels more like fall than spring at the minute. But yeah, I'm hoping that with doing this video, I might be able to like send in the good vibes, you could say. Another book I haven't read yet is this one. This is On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous by Ocean Vuong. I hope that's how you pronounce his name. And this was very much raved about in literary circles when this first came out. And it is a short book, so it's a quick and easy read. Spring tends to be a time of the year where I can be pretty busy, but I also have a bit of time off with all of the like bank holidays kind of things that we have going on around Easter, and I have May break, and there's Ascension Day break, and there's so many breaks in the springtime that it gives me a little bit more time to read. But I do like to get stuck into books that I can read very quickly then, like read something in the day, and I think this one is a nice one. Something I have read, The Perks of Being a Wallflower. Now again, this is a long time ago read. It was a very long time ago I read this. This is by Stephen Chbosky, and I believe there's also a movie with Emma Watson, if I'm not mistaken. What this book essentially did for me is that it made me want to watch the Rocky Horror Picture Show, because there's a lot of references to that movie in this book, but it's at the same time like sort of like a coming of age story. But to be quite fair, this like coming of age section of the book is not what stuck with me. What stuck with me is the fact that I very much want to watch the original movie, because the group of friends that he hangs out with all go to this movie, and then they very much get sucked into this like subculture that surrounds it. And that's the thing that really interested in me. Again, a short read, a quick read as well, and that's why I think it's a good recommendation for spring. Another quick read, at least I think it's going to be, Neil Gaiman's Coraline. This is one I haven't read yet, but I did read the Graveyard Book, and these are sort of like the children's books that Neil Gaiman has written. I feel that if you read these as an adult, at least that was my experience reading the Graveyard Book, is that you get a little bit more out of it than what you might get. I feel these are more like middle grade-ish rather than true children's books. They're sort of like, they're not quite children's books, they're not quite YA, so to me they feel more middle grade, if that makes sense. And Coraline is one I just haven't read. If I'm not mistaken, it's about a girl who wishes she had a different family and then finds that different family, but they don't necessarily have the best intentions, if I'm not mistaken. So, yeah. Coraline by Neil Gaiman. Neil Gaiman is one of my favorite authors. It is a quick read again. While his books always have some sort of like dark twists, I also feel they have a certain level of whimsy to them that makes them perfect for spring. It's not like too dark for like the brighter weather we're having. It's not like you're going full on gothic fiction with these, which is why I always love Neil Gaiman. And then there's just some things that like are nature inspired, and I saw this sitting on a shelf and like, look at that cover. It breathes spring to me. And this is by Diane Setterfield, and this is Once Upon a River. This is like a historical fiction kind of novel. This was like sitting at the bottom of a shelf where like I've kind of forgotten I even owned this, but I remember this getting a lot of hype when it was released, which is why I picked it up. A stranger who like runs into some sort of pub, and he's holding a dead child, and then the girl comes back to life. Was it magic? Was it real? And then there is a multi-layered mystery brimming with folklore, suspense, and romance. So, as well as with the urgent scientific curiosity of the Darwinian age, Once Upon a Time is as richly atmospheric as Setterfield's bestseller, The 13th Tale. So this sounds like it's got mystery. It is historical fiction. This could be more of an autumn read if I read the blurb, but I think it really is like how the themes and all that like fuses together within history. I hope that's sort of like part of it. Because it does have the folklore element, I'm pretty sure this has like this whimsical fairy tale-esque like thing to it as well, which I think might elevate this towards more of a spring level. But yeah, look at that foiling. It's so pretty. It's very, very pretty. So that's why I definitely wanted to put this one in a video as a gentle reminder to myself that I need to get to this one at some point. But in sort of that whimsical nature way, I think this series, I believe there is a second book out, but I picked this up very randomly. This is Heather Fawcett's Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies. So this is about a girl who is an expert in fairies, and I believe she's trying to document all of the different fairies there are, and she just doesn't really have great people skills. So she's sort of like is trying to find her way in the world as someone who's a little bit quirky, and I think that like the way she like interacts with the fairies is mostly part of this. Again, super pretty, stunning cover. And you know, if it's fairies in nature, I think that's a spring read for sure. I'm not sure how much fantasy this has. Like, I'm not sure if this like like some of these books, I've read a couple of these where it's like faux natural history. It's a bit like, oh, you can't see it anymore, but it's right here. Right here. A Natural History of Dragons by Marie Brennan. That's like written as if dragons were real, and she's like, the main character's like a female version of Darwin and trying to describe all these different dragons. So I'm hoping that that's like in here as well, to have that whimsical element, but that we still get like the real world as well. That's what I'm expecting with this one. Haven't read it yet. And finally, something that was released this year, so I'm pretty sure this wasn't in a haul yet, but V.E. Schwab has decided to continue the Darker Shade of Magic trilogy, which is one of my favorite all-time favorite fantasy trilogies, to be quite fair. The Fragile Threads of Power. And this takes a lot of the characters that we met in the original series, and it sort of continues their story 7 years later. That's sort of what I'm getting from this. This was pretty affordable at my local bookstore, and I'm not sure why this edition has to be so huge, because if I look at the typeset, look at how much blank space there is on these pages. Like, it's small, but there's also like a big margin here, so it seems like they've just tried to beef it out a little bit with how it's like how the binding is set up. But yeah, I'm happy to have another V.E. Schwab book. There's like, I used to have a really big V.E. Schwab moment, and then I just stopped reading a lot of the books. Not because I didn't like it, but because I became interested in other things, and I hope this one can pull me back in. I actually gifted the original series and the Vicious duology to the daughter of friends of mine. She's a teenager and she really likes fantasy, and every year I buy her books for her birthday, and like it's a big task because she loves everything I've bought her so far, and it's like every year I need to outdo myself compared to the year before. So I hope she loves these as much as I did, and I can't wait to continue the series because it is one of my favorites. And I wanted to throw in something that was a bit more like fantasy-esque. So yeah, this one is a newer book that was released just a couple of weeks ago, as far as I know. So this may be one to look into if you're looking for something new to read. And those were all of these spring books that I wanted to recommend. Some of them are older releases, some of them are newer releases, some I think might fit the spring vibes, some of them have a natural, like, nature element to them for sure, and some of them are just short, quick reads that I think you can read in a day. So if you have a bank holiday somewhere, if you're in the UK, or if, like me, you're in the Netherlands and you have things coming up like King's Day and all these days where we have national holidays coming up, I think the spring is like the heaviest season with all of these days off, where you can just get stuck in with a book if you don't want to go anywhere because it's still raining buckets and it's not very nice weather to go outside. So that's what I hope you could take away from this video. Thank you so very much for joining me. Come back next week because I make one video a week over on this channel. However, if you're interested in makeup related content, then please follow me on my main channel where I post 4 times a week, and I do also post daily blogs. So I hope you'd like to stay tuned in any of those spaces, and I hope to see you very, very soon. Bye-bye.